everybody. Minister of Finance and the Public Service, the Honourable Favour Williams, on Thursday confirmed that new taxes are going to form part of the government's 26-27 budget. But what are the new taxes? What can we expect? Joining us this morning, Economist Keenan Falconer to explain everything, because he's just good like that. Good morning, sir. Have we seen you since the new year?
No, this is the first one for the new year.
Hey, Keenan, how are you?
Morning.
Everything that's good.
At this point.
Your initial thoughts when you heard, well, first of all, she broke it the night before through a press release. And when you saw the press release, you said?
So I said that I was not really expecting new taxes right now. And just intuitively, apart from the fact that we had Hurricane Melissa, when you think about it, we need economic recovery to accelerate in the shortest possible time. So a lot of persons may not recall that after COVID, at the height of COVID in 2020, we actually reduced GCT from 16.5 to 15%. What that helped to do was to accelerate consumer spending. Most of the taxes that we see now are going essentially on consumption. And it is consumer spending that's going to drive economic recovery in this short period. Yes, we do have plans now to continue to rebuild, and as the government reconstructs infrastructure, then that is expected to have a growth effect, but that will come sometime down the line. What you need right now is a stimulus, and you need incentives to sort of get the economy going back. When we had COVID, there was a lot of pent-up demand. People were not outside for 2 years. Here, we don't really have a lot of demand in the economy because growth had been decelerating prior to Hurricane Beryl, and then we had a brief recovery, and then Melissa hit us.
Yep. Some people take the opposite view. 8.8 billion US. So them say, so where we going to get back that money? So it is almost natural that we would have the new taxes. Right. You don't agree with that?
Well, I think at the end of October, when that damage was known, so we have known the estimate of damage for quite some time. But in October, November, towards the end of last year, I don't think a lot of persons were saying, look, we expect new taxes to come in the new budget at that time. But I think a lot of persons' expectations were raised when the minister started to publicly signal that there may be some new taxes on the horizon. And what has happened is that there will be a net addition to tax revenue for the first time in 8 years. So over the last 10 years, there had been no net new taxes. So taxes were imposed for the first 2 years, but they were counterbalanced by the fact that you had some give back in those first 2 years. So this is the first net addition to taxes in that time.
So you were surprised that we were going this route, one. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, I was.
And two, you don't really think this is the best route?
Right, at the moment, no. I don't think that it was an optimal choice. I mean, when you look at the fact that the government plans to run a deficit, so over the next 4 years, it's deficit, meaning what you will collect in revenue is now below what you plan to spend by about 500 billion. Over the next year, it's going to be around 100 billion. So you have to fill that gap. Most of it will be done by borrowing. When you compare 18 billion in new taxes for the first year and 35 billion over the 2 years going up to 2028, you realize that it's not, the lion's share will already be filled by borrowing.
You probably answered the question I asked, but with my dunceness, I probably never get it.
Don't say that, sir.
But where them going to get the money from if them don't take it out of our pockets?
So when you have taxation like this, it is really essentially the question, can the government spend this money better than the people could? And when you now give back taxes, that is in reverse. So would this money have better been spent if the people had it or if the government had it? For the government to have made it up, they could have cut some non-essential expenditure or they would have had to borrow more. And so, well, it's difficult to say what some categories of non-essential expenditure might be, but that would have been one of essentially one of the realistic options. Or you continue to borrow more, but many persons think that borrowing it's all external or international. You could also borrow locally, and the government has now had a thrust to borrow more money locally than it does from abroad.
Borrow locally from where?
So, when you issue, for example, treasury bills and instruments from the central bank, people buy it. It's like a long-term instrument, a bond, and then you get interest paid on it. But the government gets the money now because it helps to fill some of the gaps. And sometimes when the government borrows, it doesn't all go into productive capital expenditure. Sometimes the government borrows for its day-to-day needs. It tries to minimize it, but you won't completely eliminate it.
So the answer would have been borrowing locally or borrowing on the international market.
Right.
I think the minister said, I don't know, you can confirm. So this is my gist. We didn't want to borrow all of it because that would have put us in a not so good position, even though we're borrowing overseas and we're apparently getting rates below.
Right. Mostly concessional rates because of our improved fiscal credibility and fiscal position.
But even with that, Keenan, you're saying...
Right. It's when you look at the trade-off in terms of taxes, you don't want to depress potentially economic activity at the point where it needs to now be kickstarted the most. So when you have new taxes coming in, just to say that it is probably not the best thing to try to evaluate what each tax has in terms of its specific impact, because all taxes, they distort economic activity. So it's just that some are more distortionary than others are less distortionary than those. But this package now has chosen, for the most part, taxes on special consumption that are largely inelastic. So those...
by inelastic, you mean?
Inelastic means that the demand and the consumption for it will not significantly change.
Gotcha.
Or you expect it not to significantly change, because whether you have a tax on the product or not, persons will still continue to buy it.
This is alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol, cigarettes, and things like that. Persons may say, it doesn't matter if there's a tax on it, I will still continue to buy it. But if it does result in a change in demand, then you may not get the revenue that you expect. So everything is based on a certain set of assumptions that you hope will be fulfilled or will come true.
In other words, some people might say, all right, we're not going to buy the sugary drinks, and then they won't get what they want to get, which is what you're saying.
Right. And then when you think about the effect of taxes, it doesn't matter if it's levied either on the consumer directly or on producers. All of it eventually gets passed down to the consumer. So thinking about the wider macroeconomic environment, inflation is also projected to rise in the medium term, and interest rates continue to remain high. So this is not an economy now where you can say people are incentivized to spend or they are compelled to spend. And spending is what will get us right out of the crisis, because it doesn't really matter whether you choose to borrow or whether you have taxes. The larger danger is in GDP that doesn't recover quickly enough, because then that means less tax revenues down the line. It means less ability for the government to be able to do things in the future. So just like COVID, when we had a swift recovery within 2.5 years, we need that sort of swiftness for this kind of recovery.
I noticed that the dollar is coming down also.
Yes.
What do you attribute that to?
So I think two things. The US dollar generally has been weakening because of confidence in, or lack thereof, in terms of what the American administration has been doing, as well as the fact that we have had many inflows of foreign exchange as a result of the dislocation caused by Hurricane Melissa. So when we have more US dollar foreign exchange coming in and we are able to satisfy the demand and now supply it, then you start to see a gradual depreciation. But that is not something that is expected to be permanent. As things normalize, you might see it going back up, or exhibiting the two-way movement that it normally does.
To COVID 2.5-year recovery for this now, you don't see us benefiting from this package anytime soon?
Well, the effect of growth will mostly be lagged, because it's going to be premised a lot on how fast the government can rebuild. So when it now puts poles into the ground and starts to actually construct buildings, the effect of it won't be seen until those are completed. And you don't build buildings in a year or two, or not all of them at least. So this is going to be a multi-year effort over several budget cycles. And we have been only considering what the physical damage has been. That's what has been quoted as 8.8 billion. When you now take into consideration economic and indirect and direct economic losses, that carries it up a bit to around 16 billion or 75%, because you're thinking about people not being able to spend, persons now are not able to make sales. Those are direct and indirect economic losses.
Yep, well explained.
Yeah.
Always good to see you.
Thanks.
All the best, my friend. Economist Keenan Falconer.
All right, up next we are zeroing in on a specific tax measure. We've got Catherine Silvera from the JMEA reacting to the new sweet drinks tax. That's after this.